I'm Victor Muthama. Welcome back to Diaspora's Media. This is going to be the first in a multi-part series discussing the various moving parts of the Black diaspora and what is preventing us from connecting. What is preventing us from unity? Is it outside forces? Is it ourselves? That's a good question. Now, simply by observing white supremacy, Europe and white people in general have a very vast ethnic diversity within them, not nearly as vast as Africa or Native America or even Islanders, but it's quite vast. However, for some reason, they're able to put these differences that they have aside for the sake of maintaining white supremacy and for the sake of maintaining the global systems. We just saw the other day, not the other day, that's just slang for, recently. We just saw Trump allow a myriad of white South Africans into the country who share no ethnic origin with him. But Trump was able to put aside those things in order to stand for together. For some reason, us Blacks, we have a much more difficult time doing this. Now, world domination be damned. I don't think any Black person wants to control the entire world. I do think Black people have a vested interest in making sure that we are no longer the victims. And this is something that we can only do if we are united. That being said, let's actually get down to what this problem is. Now, this first video is specifically going to address what I have observed as the problems between Black Americans or foundational Black Americans or ADOX, African descendants of the slave trade, and Africans, continental Africans. In this video, I'm going to discuss these observations. The tension in my observation begins from a series of uninformed opinions, political opinions, and viewpoints regarding African Americans that culminate in a dangerous false premise. This false premise is that African Americans have no culture, right? Now, in the video that I saw with Frank Zanou and David Anderson, and shout out to the both of them, those men were extremely civil in their discourse, and I believe they're friends and colleagues, and they have had many of these discussions similarly to me and my friends and colleagues. At 8 minutes and 9 seconds, Frank Zanou states, for me, first and foremost, when I talk about culture, I'm talking about a worldview. This is interesting, especially considering that his premise was that African Americans have no culture. So now he's saying culture in his mind for this particular operating definition is a worldview. So essentially, is he saying African Americans have no worldview? We all know that's not true. But in the reality of things, culture is actually something different. Culture is defined as the arts and other manifestations of human intellectual achievement regarded collectively, including the customs, social institutions, and achievements of a particular nation, people, or other social group. This definition is important to highlight. Most of the time, when the statement African Americans have no culture is made, the sentiments, and conversations surround language and ethnic homogeneity within a locale. He did mention that he wasn't talking about food. He wasn't talking about language, right? But later discussed language. And language, while it is important, That's not what we're discussing today. Today, I want to highlight the things he ignored, which Dave Anderson actually did a great job of highlighting. And that would be social institutions and achievements. Social institutions and achievements are the major thing that are continually ignored by immigrants, especially African immigrants, like my own father, my own mother. Right? A lot of immigrants come from the islands. They come from Africa. And they have social critique about African Americans and their communities today, communities which they end up integrated into, communities which their children become almost indistinguishable from. Yet they actually have very little knowledge of these communities, how they were built, where they came from, and how they were destroyed, or even, especially, how they came to garner, to earn, to fight for, and to die for some of these privileges that Africans come to immigrate to enjoy. Yet they hold such strong opinions about this community that was systematically destroyed extremely surgically by white supremacist regimes. This is my first critique. My first critique is that Africans come here, right? And they seriously have strong opinions that even my own father has denounced as Bartok. But these opinions are the exact points that allow for white supremacy to enter and further drive a wedge between a diaspora that already only looks at their differences. Racial damnation be damned, right? So that's my first critique. My first critique is that he discusses culture, but completely negates social institutions and achievements, right? For example, Africans read and write in English in the modern era. African Americans have been reading and writing in English far longer. They've been published far longer than Africans. See, the problem with the false premise of African Americans have no culture is that it leads to the natural logical conclusion that there's nothing to learn from them. And that's just not true. When you relegate culture to weddings or how you have families or how you have X, Y, and Z, it completely destroys the two main things, which would be institutions and achievements. A lot of the modern world, from the filaments and the light bulbs to ambulances to a myriad of inventions that are in the modern world, came from Black Americans. To come to Black America and say that there are no contributions or there is no culture, just because you don't know these things, is major. That's ridiculous. It's majorly ridiculous. So now, this leads me into my next point regarding culture, which would be social institutions. I asked my father when I was discussing this topic with him, I asked him, can you tell me an African university, or Kenyan university that was created by Kenyans, for Kenyans, to Kenyans, with an ethnocentric perspective? And he was silent. Now, this is something I ask continental Africans all the time. When you discuss culture, why do you leave out social institutions? Now, someone like Kwame Nkrumah, who is major in the Pan-African space, he's major in the African space. Kwame Nkrumah is a founding father of African and Pan-African thought. Kwame Nkrumah is a result of social institutions that were built by Black America. He went to a Black American, historically Black college and university. I believe it was Lincoln. So one of our top brains, our top minds, is a product of the education, of the culture of Black America. Someone like Frank Zanou needs to do his knowledge. Now, this is a major problem because I see this all the time. And it was particularly why I made the discussion in my TED Talk with CMU many years ago. This was because as an African child growing up in Pittsburgh, I saw these tensions between both communities, two communities that I hold dear, that share my reflection, but two communities I somehow couldn't reconcile. Now, a lot of foundational Black Americans would call me a tether. In a sense, I understand where they're coming from. And a lot of Africans would call me an American. And in a sense, I understand where they're coming from. Now, delineation is not inherently bad. Delineation is just more specificity. However, this delineation only began because of the amount of tension that African Americans continue to feel from continental Africans who come and reap these benefits that they fought and died for, specifically Black and African American scholarships to these white universities that these Africans hold so dear, right? African Americans fought for those. So to have this a level of arrogance, academic arrogance, right? Academic arrogance. To have this level of academic arrogance, believing that because you somehow are more skilled in your own educational pursuits, that means that you somehow have more culture because you have your language preserved and other things. Yet when you look at social institutions and achievements, the modern world would not be the modern world without Black Americans. The African modern world would not be the African modern world without Black Americans. That's highly disrespectful. And so this is something someone like myself, someone like a lot of tethers have to deal with, and rightfully so. We have to deal with this rightfully so because our predecessors came to America and decided it was a good idea to start trashing a culture that they don't know, don't understand, and don't care to learn about. Having these highly politicized opinions about a race of people that share your blood, share your DNA, right? Having these highly politicized, uninformed opinions is obviously going to rub them the wrong way. Now, this false premise, these uninformed opinions, and this academic arrogance is never spoken of. It's not spoken about amongst Africans. So I'm going to do my due diligence as an African who was raised in America, who got his knowledge of self from America, who got all of his knowledge of self from here, to check my community. Frank Zanou, this is ridiculous. And to many of the academic elite of Africa, ask yourself a question. Are African social institutions truly African? And not to say that American HBCUs are fully Black. We don't even know what that means. But to say that they have no culture, and you know Kwame Nkrumah without knowing he went to an HBCU, that's ridiculous. To say that they have, no culture, right? And not read or know the intellectuals that built, invented, and maintain some of the modern world is ridiculous. To claim to be an academic elite and not know these things, yet move to the country where you can reap those benefits of those sacrifices is ridiculous. This is something that I've been speaking about for years. From the levels of being called akata to dismissing all of the achievements just because you see the destroyed Black community that exists post 1969. It's ridiculous. Now, us tethers who grew up here and have this understanding, it's our responsibility to nip this in the bud. It's our responsibility to do that. The onus is not on Black Americans to silence this. The onus is on all of the children that these Africans brought to America who now have this knowledge. The onus is on us. So now let's continue, right? At approximately 42 minutes and 48 seconds of the exact same talk, one of the hosts from Daily Wrap-Up Crew, shout out to you, he said, every time we create something big, it was destroyed, burnt down. Frank Zanou said, like when? And later on, Dave Anderson lists the myriad of things. Why should that be a question to you? Why should that be a question that's posed by someone like Frank Zanou? That's something that should be investigated once you develop this ridiculous false premise of they have no culture. You have to substantiate that with factual evidence that supersedes your own personal observation or opinion, right? Like, for example, Phyllis Wheatley's book was published far earlier than the first Africans, right? In English. These are documents that we can review. These are things we can see, right? Additionally, at approximately 43 minutes and 18 seconds, Dave Anderson asks Frank Zanou, do you know about Central Park? Do you know what Central Park is? And Frank Zanou says, a park? And Dave Anderson responds and says, no, it used to be a Black town called Seneca Village. See, the problem is this. Africans have all of these opinions on things they observe today. They never dive into some history books and ask themselves, why is this occurring? How did it come to this? Later on in the discussion, he said, I'm not interested in the history. I don't care about the history. How can you have political opinions about a group of people that share your reflection, that share a lot of your history, that were destroyed in similar ways as you, yet you don't care to examine the history? That is something I believe is absolutely ridiculous. Now, this is simply a conflict that begins, or that we're observing in this particular context, just for this video. But this problem pervades across the entire diaspora. If we look at just African countries, the same thing is happening amongst tribes. If we look at African countries amongst each other, the same thing is happening at a national level. So by the time we reach this problem at a Black American ADOS, FBA, and African perspective, it's already happened time and time and time again. This occurred with the Native Americans within their own tribal units. This occurred within Africa later on, when the Europeans used exactly what they learned from conquering the Americas to Africa, conquer Africa. This occurred even with the Europeans themselves up in Europe prior to them conquering the rest of the world. This is a natural problem. Now, why do I say the diaspora wars are a psyop? Well, that particularly is for one reason. The only way to conquer people is to divide them first. But you can't divide them from a tension that doesn't exist. These tensions do exist. They are real and they come from a real place. This particular tension, right, is exacerbated by a tactic called tribal antagonism. Now, here is a preview of what we will continue to discuss. This tribal antagonism is exploited by common enemies. This tribal antagonism is something white supremacy was conscious about when they decided to do things like the Berlin Conference, because they couldn't fight over Africa how they fought over the Americas. They couldn't ethnically cleanse Africa how they ethnically cleansed the Americas. No, they had to learn from their past, and so do we. We can't continue to be baited into discussions of difference without maintaining the conscious thought of remembering we're being exterminated. And yes, we have ethnic differences, but we're not being exterminated based on those. We're being exterminated based on a phenotype that we believe isn't important. But for some reason, Europeans were able to recognize I might be Swedish, I might be Irish, I might be English, I might be Dutch, but I'm white, and I need to look after other whites. Hopefully, over time, we can start to knock on this door ourselves. So now, as we dive further into this, I can speak about this ad nauseum, but I don't want this video to be 1,000,000 minutes long. We're going to dive into this more. But tribal antagonism is the first aspect that we must look at. What are our differences? And why are they so exploitable? Where are they exploiting these differences from? And how can we start to knock on these doors? But before we dove into that, I needed to address this particular portion because it's just not fair for Africans to come here, raise their children here, and say, you don't have a culture. That's just not true. And I will stand with my Black brothers and sisters because that culture, tether or not, I don't care what you think about me. I'm thankful for it, and I will ride for it. Look forward for more content. Please like, comment, share, and subscribe.